You're listening to the Financial Source podcast on YouTube.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Financial Source podcast.
Good to be here.
Global markets are facing some really heavy pressure this morning.
It's a powerful combination, isn't it? You've got this geopolitical shockwave hitting at the exact same time as a huge repricing in monetary policy.
Exactly. Investors are just scrambling to ditch their bets on a December rate cut from the Federal Reserve.
And that's all thanks to strong labor data and inflation that just won't go away. It's sending the dollar soaring.
Meanwhile, this leak of President Trump's Ukraine peace plan is just adding a massive layer of uncertainty to everything from energy to risk assets. We're going to break down what it all means.
Here's what you need to know.
Okay, let's get right into it. The whole narrative has flipped, it feels like, in just a matter of days.
It's the speed that's so remarkable. A week ago, people were still positioned for that end-of-year pivot from the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, now
it's a frantic unwinding. That fragility is bleeding into every single asset class.
So let's focus on that Federal Reserve outlook first. The market was so sure about a December cut. What specifically changed that calculus so fast?
It really comes down to two big data surprises that just, shattered the old way of thinking.
Okay.
First, that delayed non-farm payrolls report. It showed a labor market that is unexpectedly, and I'd say stubbornly, strong.
The unemployment rate stayed low, wage growth was still there.
Exactly. Things policymakers absolutely cannot ignore. And second, the core inflation dynamics are just sticky. They haven't really responded to the tightening we've already seen.
So with a strong job market, the Federal Reserve has, the license to stay hawkish for longer to fight that inflation.
That's the key. Their primary mandate is price stability, and this gives them the cover to do what they need to do.
And we should probably explain what hawkish shift actually means for you listening.
Well, just look at the money markets. They're now pricing in, only a 27% chance of a December cut?
A week ago, that was over 70%. If you were positioned for that, you're losing money today.
And that's why the dollar is so firm. It's the highest yielding, lowest risk currency in the G10 right now, and it's just attracting a flood of capital.
Which, of course, puts immense pressure on other currencies, especially where the economic picture is a bit more fragile.
Right. Which brings us to the flash PMI numbers from the Eurozone earlier today.
A very mixed bag there.
Very mixed. France actually managed a bit of an upside surprise, which suggests some resilience. But the real story, the profound disappointment, was the German data.
And why is the German number so important for the bigger picture?
Because Germany is still the industrial engine of the entire bloc. It's the anchor.
So when their manufacturing numbers signal a contraction,
it immediately suggests a drag on all of European industry. That's why the euro slipped. Investors see the German weakness and assume the European Central Bank will have to pivot to rate cuts far sooner than the Federal Reserve.
And that just widens the interest rate differential.
The dollar's favor, exactly.
We saw similar softness from the UK, didn't we? The pound eased back a bit.
Yeah, it wasn't just the PMI numbers there. It was a really sharp downside surprise in their retail sales figures.
A powerful signal that the consumer is getting cautious.
For sure. It suggests the rebound might be slower than what the Bank of England was hoping for. The big takeaway is that growth momentum outside the U.S. just looks weak, and that reinforces the whole strong dollar story.
But the most interesting place for volatility, and this seems counterintuitive, isn't a currency weakening against the dollar?
No, it's the Japanese yen, which is actually strengthening.
Right, which is so strange given that the interest rate difference still massively favors the U.S. dollar.
This surge is a classic rapid-fire combination of two things. Safe haven demand, which is driven by that geopolitical shock we'll get to, and
intervention chatter.
Intense and, I would say, increasingly credible noise from Tokyo about potential intervention.
The language from Japan's Ministry of Finance seems to be changing.
It's evolving from just general warnings to much more explicit signals. The finance minister, Katayama, came out and reiterated that intervention is actively on the table.
And there's even a specific number floating around that the market is watching.
Yes. Reporting suggests Tokyo might act before the dollar-yen pair even reaches that big psychological barrier of 160.
Which is a huge deal. That 160 number provides a real line in the sand. The Bank of Japan rarely telegraphs its moves like this.
It's aggressive. It suggests the government is highly motivated to protect the currency right now.
And it's not just talk, is it? We have data showing the Bank of Japan is, slowly inching towards normalizing its own policy.
Right. The latest inflation data out of Japan confirm that price pressures are stickier than expected there too. Even a small shift in policy expectation in Tokyo, when you combine it with geopolitical haven flows.
It can be explosive for the end. It forces all those carry traders to unwind their positions in a hurry.
It really can.
This turbulence in the currency markets is actually a pretty good transition to the shifts we're seeing in global trade policy.
Yeah, while interest rates are grabbing the headlines, we can't ignore what's happening in Washington.
We saw President Trump recently remove tariffs on a few key Brazilian products: beef, coffee, orange juice.
Which is significant for South American trade. But what's more telling is the signal it sends.
How so?
It just shows a willingness to use tariffs as a very flexible, almost immediate political tool.
Which is a stark contrast to what's happening with technology on Capitol Hill.
A huge contrast. You have Congress pushing forward with new export controls on AI chips, even as the White House is reportedly asking them to slow down.
And that internal friction in Washington is the real story there.
It is. The White House is trying to manage this tech relationship with rivals strategically, while Congress is pushing for a much more aggressive, immediate decoupling.
The outcome of that fight directly impacts global semiconductor supply chains and, the valuations of those huge tech companies.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, you have Europe trying to stabilize its own trade relationships. There's talk of momentum finally building in the long-stalled Australia-European Union trade talks.
So things aren't static, but they are completely overshadowed by the geopolitical story that just blindsided everyone today.
And that is, of course, the elite Ukraine peace framework.
It has rapidly become this central macro driver, maybe even more than the Federal Reserve repricing itself.
What's incredible is the sheer scope of the proposal. The reporting outlines a 28-point plan. This isn't just a ceasefire. It's a fundamental redrawing of Ukraine's entire future.
Let's get into the specifics for Kyiv, because the demands are massive.
They are. First, Ukraine would have to cede more territory in the east beyond the current front lines.
Second, a permanent cap on the size of its military.
And third, and this is probably the most crucial part, permanently giving up any possibility of NATO membership.
That is a huge set of concessions. What would they get in return?
In exchange, they'd get a security guarantee led by the U.S. and Europe. But this is where the details really matter.
Okay.
The guarantee is modeled on NATO's Article 5, which implies collective defense. But, and this is a huge but, it lacks the formal binding treaty structure of NATO itself.
So it's like an Article 5 promise without the actual NATO treaty obligation.
Precisely. Which is a world of difference when you're talking about future defense commitments.
And that difference explains why the reaction from Europe has been so sharply divided.
Immense skepticism. We saw one European diplomat quoted who just described the plan as capitulation to Moscow. It really throws the unity of the Western alliance into question.
And you have to connect this diplomatic pressure to what's happening on the battlefield.
They are inextricably linked. President Putin recently made statements about Russian forces fighting inside Kostiantynivka, and they're claiming control of other key areas.
So the perceived momentum on the ground directly influences the diplomatic leverage from Washington.
Exponentially. If Ukraine is seen to be losing ground, the pressure to accept a deal like this just skyrockets.
This geopolitical shock is having immediate effects on commodities, too.
Of course. When this kind of uncertainty hits, traders have to reevaluate the risk premium built into energy.
Which is why oil prices are under severe pressure. West Texas Intermediate slid pretty sharply.
Absolutely. Traders are looking at this framework and trying to figure out what it means for European energy security and, crucially, for Russian exports going forward.
If it suggests a path toward reduced conflict, even a messy one, that war risk premium comes out of the price fast.
And beyond oil, you see industrial metals reflecting that weaker global outlook we talked about with the German PMIs.
Copper is trading heavy.
Very heavy. And that was made worse by reports that Chinese steel output fell sharply year over year.
And for you listening, that's a key connection. Chinese steel output is a really powerful proxy for global infrastructure demand.
When it drops, it signals lower demand for raw materials like copper in the near term, no matter what the long-term green transition story is.
Gold, though, is caught in a fascinating spot. It's drifting lower, but not collapsing.
It's a real tug of war.
Why isn't it skyrocketing with all this geopolitical risk?
Because of that hawkish repricing from the Federal Reserve. Gold is a hedge against chaos, yes, but it's also a non-yielding asset.
So a firmer dollar and the prospect of higher rates puts downward pressure on it?
Exactly. But that pressure is being counterbalanced by the massive immediate demand for a hedge against the sheer uncertainty of the Ukraine news. For now, the rate concerns are just barely winning out.
Okay. Let's move to the technical side of the market because the picture there is screaming caution. We saw one of the sharpest intraday reversals since April.
A total collapse in risk appetite. The Nasdaq 100 plunged nearly 5% from its highs in a flash.
What was the trigger for that?
Well, concerns had been brewing about massively overextended valuations, especially in anything related to AI.
So many of those stocks were priced for perfection for the next 5 years.
When the Federal Reserve outlook tightened, the discount rate you apply to those future earnings goes up, making today's valuations just untenable. The market had to reprice.
And the volatility is amplified by market structure, right? We have options expiration coming up.
Yeah, that proximity always leads to higher volatility as dealers have to adjust their hedges. It's that gamma exposure effect that can really exaggerate moves.
And the crypto space didn't help sentiment either.
Not at all. Bitcoin's collapse below $85,000 was like a barometer for evaporating risk appetite.
It signals a broad skepticism that all the money poured into AI is actually delivering proportional revenue right now.
And the poster child for this whole reversal was NVIDIA. Its post-earnings surge was completely wiped out, dragging the entire global tech sector down with it.
It really leaves this fundamental question unresolved. Can these AI valuations be justified in a higher-for-longer rate world?
That's the billion-dollar question. So as we look ahead, the market is really balancing on three major pivots we've covered.
First, the Federal Reserve repricing. Will today's data confirm the move away from December cuts and just solidify the dollar's dominance?
Second, Japan's currency stance. Does all this aggressive talk from the Ministry of Finance actually lead to intervention, or do they wait for the volatility to die down?
And finally, the fallout from the Ukraine peace plan. How will Washington, Kyiv, and the European capitals ultimately respond?
The entire situation shows a market caught between a known force, that hawkish central bank path, and a completely unpredictable shock.
It's a true test of portfolio resilience.
That covers today's critical market pivots and geopolitical developments, including the fallout from the Ukraine peace plan and the renewed focus on Federal Reserve repricing. We truly appreciate you tuning in and letting us guide you through these complex narratives.
Join us again on the Financial Source podcast next time as we continue to track these crucial global financial flows.